I would like to say thanks for inviting me. It's a beautiful place. It was a lovely dinner. I didn't have to cook. I didn't have to do any dishes. Nobody yelled at me. I was very happy. I have to tell you that when Nina saw me, I had two little kids. No, I had a 1-year-old, and I was pregnant. And I sat down cross-legged on the stage because I was so short, and it was dark. And I wanted to be able to see the audience, so maybe that's what she remembers, that I was kind of goofy. So I wish I could say we're not goofy now. This is my 10th book, and it just came out on Wednesday, and I did bring a copy for Nina. And it's really interesting to have heard all of these talks before saying what I wanted to say, which is really everything that we're talking about with books and with art and with selling or buying. It all still starts with the one thing, and that's a story, right? So I want to ask you a question first because it'll make me feel better. You're like, wait, what if we don't give you the right answer? Yeah, well, we'll see about you. All right, how many of you live within an hour of where you were born? Within an hour. This is a pretty good number. I mean, how many of you live more than an hour away from where you were born? Aha. We're definitely close to the ocean. I live in Riverside. I was born in Riverside. I live 3 blocks from the hospital where I was born. I can see the hospital from my back kitchen window. So the children at one point put a towel over it and said, "Mom, we don't like you looking out the back window because it's a clear sign of how pathetic you are." And since this is my 10th book, and since I've spent 15 years writing about what I'm going to talk to you about now, I actually started feeling bad about a year ago because my 2 older kids have left. There's one kid still at home. But every day I see people that I've known since I was in kindergarten. I mean, if I go to Target, the kids are like, "Oh my gosh, no, you're going to see someone and they're going to talk about high school and it's going to be bad." I started feeling really pathetic. I thought they were right. Their other word is pitiful. So it was pitiful or pathetic. Those were the only 2. And then I realized that I've been writing all my life. I've been writing since I was 3 years old. That's also a bad story, but you might also want to hear it. It's very instructive. My mom taught me to read when I was 3 because she's from Switzerland, and she was under the impression that you couldn't go to kindergarten in America unless you could already read. First of all, you weren't supposed to go when you were 4, but that didn't stop my mom either. She was like, "It's down the street and to the left. See you later." Like, that's what she did. She taught me to read in 1 weekend, but she's very small. She's 4'11", and she's terrifying, and she's Swiss. So apparently I did learn in the 1 weekend, and I learned at the Riverside Public Library. I wanted to go away. That's why I started with that question. I really wanted to go away from Riverside. And all of us have those plans when we're in junior high or high school, right? I'm going to go off. I'm going to go, in my case, because I had read A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. How many of you have read that book, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn? Yes, so I was going to go live in New York in an apartment with a fire escape. That was like my entire dream. I wanted to be able to go to the library that Francie did, sit on the fire escape, eat a peppermint wafer, and life would be complete. Never mind the fact that Francie had a mean mom too, if you remember, and Francie had to leave New York. So I was going to leave. I thought my best way of leaving would be to become a cheerleader. I mean, I was blonde. The fact is, though, that I had a fang, and then I had a gap. And I also had those blue cat eye glasses, which are really cool now among a certain population. So not cool when I was in the 7th grade. I had long blonde hair, but my mom didn't know what cream rinse was. They didn't have it in Switzerland. So I tended to avoid her combing my hair, so I can't really say it was a Cheryl Tiegs kind of look. Anyway, I still made the cheerleading team because I was really small, and I was the one they could throw up and down in the air. And I was very proud of that, and my mom was not very happy about that. And unfortunately, on the way to cheerleading camp, where she was supposed to drop me off, the car ran me over. And it ran over my legs, which is kind of useful for cheerleading because you need your legs. So this leg was broken, and I just thought that I would illustrate. This is straight now because it was surgically repaired. This is the bow leg. I now don't have the fang or the gap between the teeth. I still have glasses. But in the hospital, when I was in traction, I thought I should change my desires, and I decided to become a writer. Now, you're like, that's a really weird story. But it's because I have that anonymous face. It's because I don't look like anybody important. And it's because, for whatever reason it is, people tell me stories. So I thought I would tell you 2 stories. The first one is kind of scary, and the second one is really sad. And that's, as you saw, the title is Make You Cry. So we'll come to that. The first story is about Mr. G, Mr. Gaynor. So when I was in high school, I was best friends with this guy, and his dad was a roofer. His name was Mr. Gaynor. And Mr. Gaynor was terrifying. He had turquoise eyes, and he'd fallen off a roof at some time onto his face. So he had false teeth, but he didn't like to wear them. And he was half black and half Indian, and he had very burnt umber skin. But Mr. Gaynor was the most interesting man to me because he would tell amazing stories. And once I was married, he came and put a roof on our old house. And then he asked me to write letters to the Veterans Administration for him. He had lost part of his finger during the Korean War, and he'd never gotten any money for it. And he would always say he forgot his glasses, and so he needed me to write. So I would get out my little notebook, and I would write down the letter. And when we were done composing the letter, which had lots of dates and times and what had happened, then I would offer him some iced tea, and he would sit on the porch. And one day he told me this story. When his mother was pregnant with him, deep in the turpentine forests, as he said, of Florida, where his dad used to have to tap the tree to get out the turpentine and then put it in a barrel. His dad was riding on top of the cart coming out of the forest, and he was thrown from the cart and killed. So when Mr. Gaynor was born, his dad was already dead. And he said, and during the time he was telling this story, I had 3 girls, and they had all run to the back room because when Mr. Gaynor came, they would all run screaming to the back room and lock the door because of his eyes. So they never heard this story, which is probably a good thing. When he was about 7, he said he got tired of being hungry. And this is how he told me. He said, I got so tired of being hungry and I wanted some meat. So one day I took a hammer and I walked 3 miles into the woods where I knew there was this pig. Now I don't know whether the pig belonged to someone or he just knew where the pig was. I wasn't going to stop him. He said, I killed that pig with the hammer. And when it was dead, I dragged it all the way back to my mother, 3 miles, and I put it in the front yard, and I told my mother, I'm tired of being hungry. I want some meat. I want you to cook this pig. Now, if I was his mother, I would have been terrified too. But Mr. Gaynor's voice, when he told me the story, it was still so almost ragged with desperation, and by that time he was in his 60s. I listened to the story, and Mr. Gaynor drank his iced tea, and after that I would see him all over the place. And I would always look at him and think, this is a man who made everything for himself by doing something when he was a child. Didn't know how to write about it. Didn't know how to write about it. And then, and this is the sadder story, 15 years ago, exactly, this exact week, I was volunteering in my middle kids kindergarten class. Now, it was so nice to hear you talk about books and how to make art out of books, because part of what I thought I would talk about when Nina asked me was that I have a handmade book. And it sits right on my desk where I write. And it's all these little pumpkins, and they fall off a fence. So 15 years ago, I was volunteering in my daughter's kindergarten class. And I'm not good at cutting. I'm not good at anything that has to do with straight lines. So the teacher who knew me from my older daughter, she said, why don't you just sit in the corner and take care of Dion? And I said, that's a good idea. Because what I was good at was reading to kids and taking care of kids. So Dion became my charge, because he never got any sleep at home. His hair was kind of dusty and uncombed. He had sneakers that were way too big for his little feet. They were about the size of bread loaves on his feet. I knew they were hand-me-downs. And no matter what, when the teacher was reading, when somebody was supposed to be gluing or pasting, Dion would fall asleep. So I would sit him on my lap, I would tie his shoes, and I kind of was in charge of him. One day, recess time, Dion and I walked out. My daughter and her friends were all running around, and Dion's sort of scratching his stomach, and he's doing this. So of course, I asked him what? He's a boy. Do you have to use the bathroom, right? And he said, no. And I said, are you okay? And he said, yes. So when I turned away, he lifted up his striped polo shirt, and he started scratching, and he had burns all over his lower stomach. And I almost threw up. I said, it looks to me like you've got an ouchie there. And I said, does it hurt? And he said, no. And I said, I think we're going to have to go to the nurse and get some cream to put on that ouchie. And so I turned to take him in, and my daughter and her friends came running up, and they said, why is Dion going in? Why is Dion going in? And I said, he has an ouchie. We went inside to the nurse, and I showed her what was on his shirt, and she said, what happened? And he said, I spilled soup on myself. It was September in Riverside. It's like 105 degrees. I couldn't imagine that someone had spilled soup. She actually unbuttoned his fly, and there were more burns lower down. And those were not soup. They were like pink rosettes. And if you've ever seen a cigarette burn, which I had seen, unfortunately, on friends and on strangers, you can't mistake that. They're like little round flowers on the skin, and they're very pink. The nurse took him by his little shoulders, and she turned him away, and she said to me, "You can go now." And I did go, and I didn't know what to do. Child Protective Services was called, and his mother was called, his grandfather was called. I had met his grandfather early when I first knew Dion, because I brought a bag of used shoes, and I took them out to the parking lot, and I met his grandfather. And I said, "Where do you live?" And he said, "Dion lives with his mother, and she lives," and he pointed, and she lived 3 blocks from me. My street is here, go 2 more blocks, there's an arroyo, and there's a group of apartment complexes. So I knew where Dion lived. In October, I met his mom in the parking lot, and I could see that we were about the same age. I had 3 girls, and she had 3 kids. And yet she had that sort of gently, sort of beatific smile that let me know she wasn't paying any attention at all. And I said, "How did Dion spill soup on himself?" And she said, "I don't know how that happened." And she said, "Did you bring me all those shoes?" And I said, "I did. I have 10 nieces and nephews." And she said, "Thank you." So the following month, I took, if you can imagine this, for Thanksgiving, I took a frozen turkey, a bunch of clothes, and some shoes, and my middle daughter and I went to Dion's house, and he saw us from the balcony, blue stucco apartment, and he let us in, and his mom was sitting on the couch, and there were 2 men sitting in chairs, and they were just studying me and my daughter, and they looked at us, and we looked at them, and I took the frozen turkey and the books and the toys, and I put them on the counter, and his mom stood up, and we had one of those brief conversations about turkeys. And then I left. And all during Thanksgiving, I thought about what a stupid gift that was. She looked at that turkey like it was as useless as space debris. And think about it. It's something huge and frozen. It requires hours of defrosting, washing, stuffing, cooking. And I thought, what did I give her? I didn't give her anything. In fact, ever since then, I give people cooked hams. And if you're a woman in the audience, you know exactly what I mean. Giving someone a frozen turkey it's okay, but not that time. Dion never came back after Thanksgiving. And if you're wondering why I'm telling you this story, it's because when Nina asked me to talk, I found this notebook. And I had written his name in here, just his name. And it took me a while to find this because I have a lot of these little notebooks. And I found his name in here, and it just says his name, and there's nothing below it. Because I couldn't imagine what I would write about a kid like Dion. And I couldn't imagine why it would be important for me to do that. And I write still in these kind of notebooks. I write by hand on a legal pad, but my kids, they told me legal pads were boring and very unfeminine. So they tended to buy me these. This was their new one that they bought me for Christmas. And if you're laughing, I wrote the essay that I was basing this talk on in the doctor's office because my daughter broke her toe leaping over the coffee table to answer the phone for a robocall about a political action committee, and I wrote the essay here. So if you want to talk old school, this is about as old school as it gets. However, it took me 15 years to write about Dion. I could not write the truth, and I could not come up with the right story. And somehow with this book, it's my 3rd book in being obsessed with this kid who's burned and being obsessed with his grandfather who ends up being the man who killed a pig when he was younger. And so I tried putting this story together, and I wrote a story about a man who is orphaned during the 1927 Great River Flood in Mississippi River Flood in Louisiana. And he's on the banks of the levee, and he's starving. And there are other people starving too. And he's so desperate, he's 7 years old, that he finds a pig that's been abandoned, he kills it with a hammer, and he drags it back. And as the woman he's taken it to is beginning to cook the meat, she's shot by someone in the National Guard for having stolen pig. And her body lands in the river, and she floats away, and this man, who's 7 at this point, grabs the first piece of meat, and instead of eating it himself, he puts it into her son's mouth. And her son is 4. And they become brothers then. That's their bond. And decades later, they buy an orange grove in a place like Riverside. And his grandson turns out to be the boy who's burned. Now, I can't say that what I do saves anyone, because it doesn't. In fact, somebody asked me last week if it's like an exorcism when you spend 15 years thinking about someone, these 2 stories. But that's not the right term, is it? Because an exorcism, as far as I understand it, first of all, It sounds horrible. But secondly, it means you're casting something out and you never think about it again, and that's the last thing that happens. And then this person said, well, are you honoring people by writing about them? But I don't think that's right either. Do you? Because Dion, whom I've never seen again, even though I drive past his apartment complex every single day to take my last kid to school, and every single day, without fail, I look up at that balcony and I think, where did Dion go? What if that's him across the street? Because my daughter's 21 now, the middle one, and she's in college. She read the pumpkin book, which is sitting there on my desk, which we made together, Dion and Delphine and me. 6 little pumpkins sitting on a fence. 1 fell off and how many are left? Then she read the snowflake book. In the spring, she read the daisy book. After 1 petal falls off, how many are left? She goes to USC. She's 21. Dion would be 21. Where is he? I don't think he feels honored at all because he doesn't even know someone wrote about him, and he still has scars. So why write then? Why do we do it? I think we do it for the exact same reason that Nina brought up, which I had no idea what Nina would say, but we all wanted someone else to tell us a story, didn't we? We want that person to tell us a story. Maybe the story is scary, maybe it's happy. My middle daughter read the book that comes before this one day. That was the first time that she'd read any of my books. And she called me. I was actually going to the Corona Public Library. And she called me and she said, I read your book, and you're right. Your job seems to be to make people cry. That's a terrible job. Congratulations. And she hung up. She's really mean. She's very beautiful. But I get letters and emails all the time in these 22 years. I got one, so oddly enough, I got one this morning from Long Beach. And someone wrote to me and said, I got your new book. It made me cry. I stared at my son in his crib, and I cried and cried and cried. So Delphine's right. You are very good at your job, and it's a terrible job. I think it's just the job I was put on earth here to do, since I couldn't be a cheerleader, since I had to learn to walk again. And since maybe, ever since that time I learned to read when I was 3, just like Nina, my life has been about story. And if people like us don't put together the story or the art and tell you the story, it's not that we honor someone or we exercise them, it's only that we remember them. If nothing else, you hold something in between your hands, or you hold it on an iPad or a Kindle. But you hold it however. And then that story, which is really something that only existed in an image or in the air, becomes something that hopefully you never forget. Thank you.